Welcome, and thank you for signing up for our CLE presentation on the link between animal abuse and child abuse. My name is Randall Carmel, and I've been practicing law in the family courts of New York City since 1987. And for the last 3 years, I have chaired the New York City Bar Association's Committee on Children and the Law. In that capacity, it's been my pleasure to collaborate with the members of the Bar Association's Animal Law Committee. Our panel for this presentation includes the chair of that committee and 2 of its members. Christine?
Thanks, Randy. Good morning, everybody. My name is Christine Mott. I'm a commercial attorney here in New York, and I'm also the chairwoman of the Animal Law Committee of the New York City Bar Association. And in that capacity, I've really been fortunate to focus on a lot of different areas of law where human and animal interests intersect. And of course, a prime example of that is what we'll be speaking about today, family law. Our program today is definitely focused towards family law practitioners, but we want to let everybody know that regardless of whether you're a family law practitioner, some other type of attorney, or whether you're another professional entirely different to an attorney, we think that today's presentation will really be important and informative for you. And that's because animal cruelty, child abuse, and domestic violence are really important issues that affect everybody in society, regardless of whether you're a lawyer or another professional. And it's really important to know that these 3 crimes bear the same root, and that root being cruelty, violence, and disregard for the suffering of others, and particularly when those others are the most vulnerable members of society that might not be able to speak for or defend themselves. So we think that today's presentation is really important and informative for both practitioners and really everybody in the community to help really understand what the link is between these crimes and how to proactively address them in your own distinctive practice areas. So again, thank you so much for being here, and we hope that you enjoy today's presentation.
Good morning. My name is Elizabeth Frere. I'm on the Animal Law Committee, and I came to that committee after doing many years of rescue here in New York City. During the day, I am a securities attorney at Emmett, Marvin & Martin.
Good morning. My name is Michael Devereaux. I had the great fortune and honor over the years of appearing in courts and working in cases throughout the country, including California, Chicago, Philadelphia, and down south. I am admitted to the U.S. Supreme Court and worked in a couple of Supreme Court cases. I generally do professional malpractice, defending physicians, architects, and engineers, social workers, and of course, among others, attorneys. I also do corporate and commercial law. I started doing pet law or animal law about a half-decade or so ago in honor of my dog Apollo, who passed away. Just last Thursday, my firm successfully obtained a TRO stopping a massive deer killing or cull in Long Island, New York, in the town of East Hampton. It was widely reported in the New York Times and on various media, including on TV. The TRO and those papers will be linked to my website, and my website is devlegal.com. I just want to take a second and saying we're doing this MCLE, and now right this second, what I'm saying right now is a tribute to my colleague Randall Carmel. So you appreciate that what we call the link, a profound link, a predictive link that is so powerful, a diagnostic tool, that it is almost certainly an absolute certain predictive tool. Our times right now we are living in are transformational. Our generation's implementation of this transformational time, of this predictive link, is something that's been known for centuries, but is now just being implemented in our law and our practice. We're going to go into details among us with some complexity, but the number one takeaway is this predictive link. Grasping this concept has vast ramifications for your areas of legal practice, particularly family law. Thank you very much.
A well-established and growing body of research has demonstrated a connection between animal cruelty and violence against humans, including child abuse and other domestic violence. When animals in a home are abused or neglected, it is a warning sign that others in the household may not be safe. This educational presentation has a twofold purpose. First and foremost, we want to help legal practitioners and other professionals help identify animal cruelty in the home as an indicator of child abuse or neglect or domestic violence. However, we also hope this course will move you to inform others of the link so that our society's awareness of the seriousness of animal cruelty is increased. Our presentation today will be delivered in a roundtable discussion format, which will follow the PowerPoint document that we have provided to you. I will ask Elizabeth to start us off.
Thanks, Randy. So why is this important? Why should you care about animal abuse? 4 main reasons here. Animal abuse exposes other criminal behavior, the link between animal abuse and family violence, the willingness to discuss animal abuse versus child abuse or domestic violence, and the role of pets in American families. So first, let's look at animal abuse and how it exposes other criminal behavior. Animal abuse is not an isolated incident, and it can be seen as the tip of the iceberg for crimes in general, but specifically violent crimes. 70% of people charged with cruelty to animals were known by police for other violent behavior, including homicide. 35% of search warrants executed for animal abuse or dog fighting investigations resulted in seizures of narcotics or guns. And the Chicago Crime Commission found that 82% of offenders arrested for animal abuse had prior arrests for battery, weapons or drug charges, and 23% had subsequent arrests for felony offenses. So we can see there's a significant correlation between animal abuse and crime. Next, we move to the link between animal abuse and family violence. Animals often become victims in the battles of power and control that typically mark child abuse and domestic violence. An abuser's first target is often an animal living in the home, while the second is a spouse or a child. And this can have a variety of results. First, let's take a look at women. Women who are abused often stay in dangerous domestic situations due to threats against or concern for the safety of their companion animals. In fact, 12 independent surveys have found that between 18% and 48% of battered women have delayed their decision to leave or have returned to their abusers out of fear for the welfare of their animals. 71% of abused women said their partners harmed, killed, or threatened their pets, and 87% of these incidents occurred in the presence of the women to control them. Now let's take a look at children. One study showed that abused animals were found in 60% of homes where child abuse or neglect was found, and 88% of homes where physical child abuse occurred. And then we have the issue of children abusing animals. Children who abuse animals may be repeating a lesson learned at home, abuse by another family member against an animal or person. And the result is that children exposed to domestic violence are 3 times more likely to be cruel to animals. Children's abuse of pets can be a manifestation of the child's response to their own victimization. In essence, they're replicating on animals the dynamics of their own abuse experience. And you can see that 26.8% of boys and 29.4% of girls who are victims of physical and sexual abuse and domestic violence have been reported to abuse the family pet. This can't be a surprise, given that in a study of abused women with children in the home, 75% of the incidents of animal abuse occurred in the presence of children to psychologically control and coerce them. In most cases, the parent responsible for abusing the child was often the person who injured or killed the family pet. And now Randy will speak about the willingness to discuss animal abuse versus child abuse or domestic violence and the role of pets in American families.
I've been interviewing children in context of family court proceedings for over 20 years. And one of the techniques that I use, and I know that many of my colleagues use, is that we initially establish from our client who is in the household. And when we do that, we include a discussion of any household pets that may be in the household. I have found over the years that when a child reports that they have a pet, if I make a connection with that child and try to develop my relationship through a discussion about their pet, their relationship with their pet, I find that my client is much more open to discussing all issues that are in the house. Like the slide that we have for you says, victims are more willing to talk about their harm to their pet than they are most times about talking about harm that may be inflicted upon another family member or their mother or their father. So I think it's really an important interviewing technique to establish a relationship with your client through talking about the household pets and their relationship to the pet and others' relationship to their pet. If you look at the role of pets in American society, you'll understand sort of the importance of sort of flushing these issues out. 64% of households with children under 6 and 74.8% of households with children over the age of 6 have pets. 75% of women entering domestic violence shelters own pets in the last 12 months. 1 million animals are abused or killed each year in the United States in domestic violence situations. I can't overemphasize the importance of when you're interviewing a child to interview the child in regard to the household pet, who takes care of the pet, who has access to the pet, who, if anyone has ever harmed the pet. You'll find that this vehicle will give you sort of a channel into much more in-depth sort of understanding of the child's world. So.
Thank you, Randy. So these are some of the points we think are of fundamental importance to you in your role in working with child abuse or domestic violence. Now let's take a closer look at the link to learn more about it. So what is the link? Over the past 30 years, researchers and professionals in a variety of human services and animal welfare disciplines have established significant correlations between animal abuse, child abuse, domestic violence, elder abuse, and other personal violence. Animal cruelty is no longer seen as an isolated incident. It's often an indicator or predictor crime and a red flag warning sign that other family members in the household may not be safe. And this is not a new concept. Actually, over 250 years ago, acknowledgement of the link between animal cruelty and interpersonal violence was made by Kant, and we have a quote from him here. "He who is cruel to animals becomes hard also in his dealings with men. We can judge the heart of a man by his treatment of animals." William Hogarth, a painter, engraver, and social critic in England, also made this connection. In 1751, he published 4 printed engravings entitled The 4 Stages of Cruelty that underscored his beliefs that cruelty to animals leads to other forms of social ills. Each print depicts a different stage in the life of the fictional character Tom Nero and is meant to be a form of moral instruction, showing the easy path from childish thug to convicted criminal. And we have these slides here for you. Here we have the first stage of cruelty, and conspicuous in the center is Tom Nero being assisted by several boys to insert an arrow into a dog's rectum. That's center right of your slide. And other boys in that print are carrying out equally barbaric acts. The 2 boys at the top of the steps are inserting a hot needle into the eyes of a bird, burning its eyes out. Another boy in the lower right-hand corner is tying a bone to the tail of a dog. On the left hand, towards the back, you can see 2 cats have been hung by their tails and are fighting, and they're being cheered on by a group of boys. And in the bottom left-hand corner, a dog is attacking a cat. And in the very rear left, you can see a cat has been thrown out a window with 2 bladders attached to it to make it fall even more quickly from the window. So then we move on to our second slide. And here, Tom is now an adult, and his horse, worn out from years of mistreatment and overloading, has collapsed. It's broken its leg and has upset the carriage. Disregarding the animal's pain, Tom furiously beats it and puts its eye out. Elsewhere in the scene, other acts of cruelty against animals are taking place. In the lower right-hand corner, a drover has beaten a lamb to death. A donkey is driven on by force despite being overloaded. That's in the rear center. An enraged bull tosses one of its tormentors. And the cruelty is also advanced at this point to include abuse of people. On the right side, you can see that a wagon crushes a playing boy while the wagon owner sleeps, oblivious to the boy's injury, and beer is spilling from his barrels. And then moving on to the third stage of cruelty, this is cruelty in perfection. By the time of the third plate, Tom Nero has progressed from the mistreatment of animals to theft and murder. He has encouraged his lover to rob and leave her employer, and then he murders her when she meets him. The murder is particularly brutal, as you can see in the print. Her neck, wrist, and index finger are almost severed. And in the center foreground of the slide, you can see a trinket box. Those are the goods that she had stolen from her employer, and they lie on the ground beside her. On the left-hand side, a woman is searching Tom Nero's pockets, and they uncover pistols and a number of pocket watches. This is evidence of Tom Nero having turned to highway robbery. So now the final stage is the reward of cruelty. And having been tried and found guilty of murder, Tom Nero has now been hanged, and his body has been taken for public dissection, which was very common in England at the time. And the dissectors, their hearts hardened after years of working with cadavers, are shown to have as much feeling for the body of Nero as Nero had for his victims. You can see his eye is put out there on towards the right-hand center side. That's just as his horse's eye was put out. And in the lower foreground, a dog feeds on his heart, taking poetic revenge for the torture inflicted on one of its kind in the very first plate. And now Christine will bring us up to modern times with some current examples of the link.
Thanks, Elizabeth. So Elizabeth has just provided us with some really profound scientific and historical data about the link between animal cruelty and other forms of violence. And to add some more color to that, I'd like to round it out with some more modern and familiar examples that will give you, I think, more insight and understanding of the link as it is occurring today in our society. To back up a little bit, since at least the 1970s, the FBI has actually been using animal cruelty as a factor in profiling serial killers and other mass murderers, after its own Bureau study concluded that animal cruelty, and certainly very egregious forms of it, was a common trait of many notorious and violent offenders. A few of these include Albert DeSalvo, the Boston Strangler, Dennis Rader, the BTK killer, Jeffrey Dahmer, a well-known serial killer, and many of the school shooters, including the Columbine student shooters. All of these offenders have in common the fact that they first turned to animals. Many of them tortured and killed dogs and cats in very violent and horrific ways prior to turning their attention to people. Well, of course, we will see that it's not just limited to these mass murderers and serial killers, but rather the link is very prevalent in kind of more common family violence situations, including with respect to neglect situations of children and more violent and abusive situations both with children and domestic partners. And I'd like to just go through a few examples that we've actually just pulled from recent news headlines throughout the country. And we will really see through these examples that all too often animal neglect just goes hand in hand with child neglect and other forms of neglect and abuse. So to go through a few of these, if we step back to last year in June, we have 2 Florida parents who were charged with animal abuse and child neglect for keeping 2 children and 19 neglected, starving dogs and cats in a condemned family home. In 2012, 2 parents in Pennsylvania were charged with child neglect and animal abuse when police discovered their 2 young children and pets in a home infested with roaches, covered in feces and urine, and one of the children had reported that he had been beaten by his father. Most of the animals found in the home were all in poor health, without food, water, or shelter. In the same year in Florida, 2 women were charged with child abuse and animal cruelty after police found a baby surrounded by animal feces and urine and a starving dog tied up in the yard without food or water. Also in Florida in 2012, we have a situation where a woman was charged with child neglect and animal cruelty when police responded to a report of animal abuse. Upon entering the home, the police found 2 children in deplorable conditions, over 20 dogs confined without food or water, some with injuries, some dead, and as it turned out, this woman had previously been charged with animal cruelty. Another more profound example is from a few years earlier, in 2005 in Indiana. Police had responded to a call from neighbors about the plight of a dog tied up outside a home without food or water. And upon investigating the situation, the police entered the home, and what did they find? They found a 3-month-old child lying near piles of feces, trash, and rotten food. So again, these examples I think really show neglect to one creature is very prevalent and will go hand in hand with neglect of others in the home. So something certainly to be aware of. Next, moving on to, I guess, more violent actions, intentional acts of violence that are inflicted upon animals in a home often also go hand in hand with other forms of violence and abuse towards human members of that household. In these situations, what the abuser is saying to the victim by inflicting harm on an animal in the home is, look what I can do to your animal, and just imagine what I can do to you. As Elizabeth has mentioned, a lot of times abusers will carry out these acts of cruelty on animals to have control over victims and to hurt them in the same way if they were to threaten another member of the household who's a person. For example, threatening to harm a mother if a child isn't quiet about sexual assault or other abuses, things of that nature. So this is certainly perhaps an even more elevated form of abuse, transferring it first on the animal and then onto others in the home. I'd like to go through a few more examples, and these again are all been pulled from news headlines throughout the country and really demonstrate, again, where there is abuse of animals in a home, it all too often goes hand in hand with abuse of people in the home, whether it's children or domestic partners. In Texas in 2013, police responding to a 911 call from a woman who claimed her husband had threatened to kill her led to the husband's arrest for animal cruelty when detectives found 13 dogs beaten and locked in cages without food or water and with injuries consistent with dog fighting. Also in that year in Michigan, a man was charged with animal cruelty for beating his neighbor's dog to death with a golf club. The man had reportedly threatened his neighbor, who was the owner of this dog, and her infant son, and said, "I killed your dog. What more do I have to do to you? Next will be your son." Also in 2013, excuse me, now we're moving on to, yes, it's 2013, there's a man in Texas who was charged with felony assault and also animal cruelty after he assaulted his girlfriend and killed their 2 dogs. Prior to assaulting his girlfriend, the man had killed his girlfriend's 5-pound poodle by slamming the poodle into the wall. A month after that, the man started beating his girlfriend for hours until the remaining dog in the home intervened, trying to protect the woman. The man stabbed that dog to death. In 2012, in Alabama, a man was charged with animal cruelty for killing the family dog by slicing open the dog's neck in an attempt to intimidate his wife during a custody battle over their children. The man reportedly sent a photograph of the dog in this condition to his wife with the caption, "Your day is coming." In 2013, in North Carolina, a man was charged with felony assault, child endangerment, and animal cruelty after beating the family's kitten to death and then beating and choking his fiancée in front of their 2-year-old daughter. In 2012, in West Virginia, a man was charged with abduction and animal cruelty in connection with the torture and killing of 29 dogs in a domestic violence intimidation scheme. The man reportedly told his girlfriend that the only way she was leaving the home was in a body bag and forced her to hold puppies and other animals as he killed them using electric drills through their head. In 2012, we have another situation where a man was sentenced to prison for animal cruelty and assault after he killed his girlfriend's cat and left the cat's body at her front door with a note that read, "You're next." So I know these examples are very graphic and hard to hear, but I think it's really important that we take them in and really consider them because they're really very poignant and important examples of how this interplay of violence really occurs and why it's so important, even if perhaps at first glance you're not seeing child abuse in a home or domestic violence. If there's any evidence of neglect or abuse of a pet, there's a very good chance there's more to be found. So please always be aware of that. And now we're going to check in with our ethics expert, Elizabeth, who will discuss the ethical implications in this situation.
Thank you, Christine. So what do you do with this information? And if you're a family court practitioner, what are the implications for you as an attorney? We think this issue affects your ethical obligation to perform as a zealous advocate for your clients and to maintain your competence as an attorney. Therefore, some points to keep in mind are understanding the link between violent crimes and how it allows attorneys to better protect their clients, their community, and prevent future violence. And when you know that between 18% and 48% of women are delaying leaving their abuser or are returning to their abuser out of fear for the welfare of their animals, learning how to file an order of protection that includes pets in some cases may help be the catalyst for women to leave an abusive situation and thereby prevent future abuse. Next, when animal abusers are held accountable, other crimes, particularly domestic violence and child abuse, may be prevented, and other crimes perpetrated by an abuser may carry a heavier penalty. And an example of this second point is if you have a case that involves the sexual abuse of a child, in addition to killing the family cat in order to gain silence and compliance by that child, the sexual abuse charge will carry a larger penalty upon conviction when you include the animal abuse charge. So that's yet another reason to speak to children about their pets and to take animal abuse seriously.
Well, I think this is a perfect sort of example of the importance that I mentioned earlier about when you're interviewing a child, or if you're interviewing a parent, but in particular when you're interviewing a child, to really ascertain issues regarding the pet, if there's a pet in the home, and if there is, how that pet is treated. I think that with the availability of order of protections on behalf of pets, you wouldn't zealously be advocating for your client and not if you weren't securing an order of protection for one of their pets, if they disclose that to you. So I think that it's really important to do a thorough interview with your client in a family court proceeding or criminal proceeding involving children to make sure that you have a good understanding of what pets are in the home and how those pets have been treated.
Thank you, Randy. And now I'll turn it back to Christine, who will tell us a little bit more about some state laws.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Well, as we've heard, data has continued to develop through the work of psychologists, criminologists, and other experts in really demonstrating this link between animal cruelty and other forms of violence. And as this work has progressed, we'll see that state laws have really developed themselves to acknowledge this. And I wanted to go through a few examples of how this has come to materialize. The first, and I think prime example of this, is the different state cruelty laws throughout the country. Today, all 50 states have animal cruelty statutes, and the vast majority of them have felony penalties for aggravated cruelty. There's just a few states, unfortunately right now, that only have misdemeanor penalties. Those are Idaho, North Dakota, and South Dakota. So hopefully they will get in line with the rest of the country soon. It's important to note that most of these felony provisions were somewhat recently enacted, and most of them were enacted, in fact, between the 1990s and early 2000s, specifically in response to a heightened awareness of this link between animal cruelty and other forms of violence, combined with, of course, increased news stories of these really egregious stories of abuse that are happening. And so people were really up in arms that this should be taken more seriously, both for the welfare of the animals, but also because of this link. So if we just take a look at some of the legislative findings behind these felony cruelty laws, you'll see that it really does focus in on the link that we're talking about today. For example, when New York State passed its felony cruelty provisions, the New York State legislature expressly noted the connection between animal abusers and violence towards humans in its findings. Similarly, in California, when it passed its felony cruelty laws, the legislature expressly noted an irrefutable link between domestic violence, child abuse, and animal cruelty. And as we're talking about these state cruelty laws, I think it's helpful to take a bit of a step back into history to really understand the context in which these laws were originally enacted and how they've developed to where they are today. New York was actually the first state to pass an all-encompassing animal cruelty law in all of the US, and this was in 1867. And for the first time in that year, there was a law enacted that essentially made animal cruelty by any person against any animal to be a crime. And the statute said that any person who needlessly mutilated or killed any living creature would be guilty of a misdemeanor. And this was notable because there was actually about 40 years prior to this, a prior version of the New York animal cruelty law, but it was very limited in that it only applied to commercially valuable animals at the time, which were typically horses and livestock, and it only would apply to third parties. So that would mean, you know, if your neighbor were to come and beat your horse, he could be charged with this law, but if the owner of the horse beat his own horse, he would not be charged. So this 1867 law that New York passed, that it would apply to all animals by any person, was really a game changer and very important. Also very important to note, a bit of history, is one of the primary drafters of the New York law was a man by the name of Henry Bergh, who's most well known, I think, for being the founder of the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, or the ASPCA. But what many people don't know is that Mr. Bergh was also one of the founding members of the New York Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children. And this was the first child welfare organization in the country. And Mr. Bergh and the New York Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children actually prosecuted the very first child cruelty case in all of the United States. So we will see that from essentially the start, there was this dual recognition of you know, the rights of animals and the rights of children, and that it was really needed for someone else to speak up for these beings that really couldn't defend themselves. So after the New York law was passed in 1867, there were a lot of other states that followed suit throughout the 19th century and modeled their own state cruelty laws on the New York law. And you will see that even today, much of this language remains unchanged, with the exception of the added penalties for those states that have, well, the majority of states that have increased penalties for aggravated cruelty. Now, there were several purposes to these early laws, and they remain for the most part true today. They were to protect personal property, and that would be the animals, as animals are, they were then and they are considered now to be property under the law. Also to prevent animal cruelty, acknowledging that animals suffer and feel pain and should not be subjected to cruelty. And third, as we're really focusing on today, to address the link between cruelty to animals and violence to people. And we've included for you, I think, a really neat quote from the General Counsel of the ASPCA as he was speaking before the Delaware Bar Association in the 19th century in favor of enacting animal cruelty laws. And to justify this, he was telling people, look, cruelty to animals, quote, injures the moral character of those who witness it and may therefore be treated as a crime. So beyond these state animal cruelty laws, we have another example of how the law has really developed to acknowledge this link. And that's demonstrated through these more recent laws that allow courts to issue orders of protection for pets. I know we spoke briefly about this before, and we're going to get into a little more detail here so you really have a better understanding of this and how you might go about filing this on behalf of your client who has a pet. To back up, though, and kind of look at how these were essentially brought into play because of the understanding of the link, we'll look again at the legislative history. If we look at the California law allowing orders of protection for pets, this was enacted in 2005, and as the legislature noted, there's a profound connection between animal abuse, family violence, and other forms of community violence. And there was a similar finding by the New York State legislature when it passed its version of the law in 2006. And there we see that the legislator expressly noted the connection between animal abuse and domestic violence, including that often abusers, in an effort to control and threaten their partners, may harm or kill their pets. So as I mentioned, we want to help you have a better understanding of what it means to have an order of protection and how to go about filing that. To begin with, you should know that these orders of protection for pets are judicial orders with the same legal force as orders of protection for people. And you should really be aware of it for many reasons, as we will go through. Today, at least 26 states have laws that would permit an animal to be covered by an order of protection. We've included these states here in the slide so you can see. You'll also note as we go through some examples, most of these laws have really been housed statutorily with the general provisions for orders of protection. So it'll be, orders of protection for people and pets, boom, 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 all in the same place. And I think that's important to note because it really acknowledges that you need to look at a family or household in a more global setting. You're not just looking at one person in a household, but everybody, and that includes the family pets. So we're going to just hone in on a few different states to give you a better sense of some of the language. We have extracted here the law from New York. And you'll see that under the law, any court in New York State is allowed to issue an order of protection to basically confine the behavior of anybody who would harm or threaten another, including an animal. Here we see the language would allow a judge to issue an order ordering someone to refrain from intentionally injuring or killing without justification any companion animal the respondent knows to be owned, possessed, leased, kept, or held by the petitioner or a minor child in the household. So it's pretty broad. Although as we're moving to a next example, California, you'll see that's actually a bit more broad. If we look at the language, you'll see this order of protection could even have someone stay away, forbid the respondent from taking an animal, transferring an animal, or even threatening an animal. So it really, I think, was written, the drafters really understood the connection, and I think some of the examples that we've gone through of how people are really using animals to manipulate situations, and this really, the language I think is importantly very broad to really address that problem. Also, we've included the language from the Illinois statute for your review, and here we have essentially the same ability of a court to issue an order to protect a family pet, and again, ordering someone to stay away from an animal, forbid someone from taking the animal, transferring the animal, harming or otherwise disposing of the animal, so somewhat similar to the California and New York example we just saw. There's also a separate law or statutory provision in Illinois, and this says that a court may enter any additional injunctive orders that the court would see fit to do to protect the animal from any other acts of abuse, neglect, or harassment. So now we have a better idea of what these orders of protection are. I wanted to check in with our ethics expert, Elizabeth, who will provide a little more color. Well,
Christine, before we jump to Elizabeth, let me just say that the power of securing an order of protection can't, again, be underestimated. This is because it puts everybody on notice right off the top. And importantly, if there's a violation of the order of protection, contempt, the power of the court to issue a contempt order is triggered. And that means you could really de-escalate the violence, protect your client. Somebody could go to jail. The violation of an order of protection can lead to incarceration. So it's a powerful tool. It's underutilized in my experience, and we're hoping that through this CLE that more attorneys will have this on their radar. So
Thanks, Randy. And actually that reminds me, we did include in your written materials that you have, in addition to this PowerPoint, we've actually included for you some model applications for, I believe, New York State and California that show you a model application of what you would file with the court, and we've highlighted the section where it refers specifically to animals. But of course, you should check, depending on what jurisdiction you're in, check to see, one, that you have the law, and it may be that the model form that's offered by the court system may not specifically include that, but if the law is on the books, you should know that you should, of course, modify the application as necessary to include the animal.
As a practice pointer, a good practice pointer, following up on Randy and Christine, is most judges are unaware of this link and unaware of the laws that exist, the statutory framework. So it may be a good idea if we'd actually bring a copy of the statute with the template of the order, even have one written up just like you're in federal court where you present the order in advance. Because again, this is not, it's why it's understood from a long time ago, centuries ago, it's now becoming embodied and becoming acknowledged in our laws now. It's a transformational thing. It's up to you to notify the judge to bring it with you, and that's a good way to do it, is bring the actual statute from your state law and bring it to the judge and say, Judge, let me show this to you.
No, those are excellent points, everyone, and excellent ethical issues. Something for attorneys out there to look into are orders of protection for pets available in your state? And are there other resources available to assist a client with a pet seeking to leave a family violence situation? And Christine will talk about this a little bit later, but something to look into is co-sheltering or other dedicated pet sheltering available? Is there counseling available? And as a reminder to the attorneys out there, it's important for you to inform your clients with pets who are the victims of family abuse that a pet order of protection may be obtained, and recommend clients to proceed in obtaining that pet protection order, as it is in the best interest of the client to leave a violent situation. And if a pet is the one that's preventing them from leaving because of concern or care for that pet, that's definitely something for you to inform your clients of. And next we'll move back to Christine.
Thanks, Elizabeth. So I wanted to go through one other example in which the law has really developed and is really, as we speak, continuing to develop to recognize this link between animal abuse and other forms of violence. And that is laws regarding cross-reporting. And what we mean by that is we've all heard of mandatory reporters for child abuse, and there are, of course, animal control officers, police officers that would be required to report animal abuse. So what we're looking at here is the intersection of that, when animal welfare control workers might have an obligation to report any suspected child abuse or neglect that they see, and similarly, child protective workers having some sort of obligation to report suspected animal cruelty or neglect when they see it. And the premise, of course, is really what we've been talking about here is, one, you have these two groups of people that are typically in home situations where they would have the ability to notice and really witness these potentially bad situations, whether it be for people or for animals. So they're on the front lines, and it really makes sense that if they're there to see it, that they may report it. And that, of course, is bolstered by all the knowledge we now have that if there is, for example, animal abuse or neglect in the home, it's very likely there's also child abuse or neglect in the home. So it's also important that we think of this as really a collaborative effort, and I think that's what a lot of states have really been trying to do with these cross-reporting laws. We're going to go through some of these laws in further depth, but just to provide a little more clarification, it really does vary greatly by jurisdiction. So we will see that there are some states where it's mandatory cross-reporting on both ends. So the animal worker must report child abuse, and the child protection worker must report the child abuse. But we'll see that there are also states where there might just be mandatory on one side for one type of worker, and it might be just permissive or suggested for the other. But again, I'll give you some more specific examples as we go through them in a minute. First, I just wanted to draw your attention to the number of states right now that have some sort of cross-reporting laws on the books. And you can see that it's not all states, but it's certainly it's a decent amount of states, and it's continuing to develop. And really, if you check the legislative activity in states, a number of bills have been introduced and continue to be introduced that would try to further develop this in other states. So, as I mentioned, let's hone in on a few state examples, so you have a better idea of what these cross-reporting laws are. In California, for example, animal workers are mandatory reporters of child abuse. And so this would include veterinarians, humane officers, animal control officers. Whereas we have child protection workers are not mandatory reporters, but there is a law that essentially urges them to. It says that they may report the known or reasonably suspected animal cruelty, abuse, or neglect. And just like with mandatory reporting laws for folks with respect to child abuse, if there's a reasonable suspicion of this animal abuse or neglect, the person reporting it would be insulated from liability, so there shouldn't be that concern. We'll look next at Illinois, which is pretty different than California in that it really is mandatory on both ends. So we have animal workers, which would include humane officers, investigators, animal control officers, all being mandatory reporters of child abuse or neglect. And similarly, we have child service workers also being mandatory reporters of animal abuse or neglect. In fact, if you look at the law here, we've extracted it, says that any sort of child service professional must immediately make a written or oral report regarding suspected animal abuse or neglect. We've included for you to see a couple other states that have more of this hybrid version. New York, as you will see, and also Virginia, both make it mandatory for animal workers, humane officers, and animal control officers to report suspected child abuse or neglect. But there's no corollary mandate for the child service workers. And also, it's a bit of a distinction from California, where we saw it was expressly included that they may report. Here, the law is kind of silent, although there is no law that would prevent them from doing so. So we don't quite have the same level of the legislation urging or suggesting that these child protective workers go ahead and report. But again, it is permissible. So that's definitely an area that it is developing, so it's kind of a stay tuned, and we'll see where these states end up at the end. So I wanted to check back in with Elizabeth now.
Just one note on that. With respect to mandatory cross-reporting, the necessary adjunct to the cross-reporting is database. You have to have creation of a database because of the mandatory nature of the cross-reporting. And this is all in connection with the transformational paradigm with respect to the implementation of the growing awareness of the link. You have databases being controlled on a local level, on a state level, and it has yet to be done on a national level. However, it's not done uniformly. We now in New York, we have Suffolk County, which is one of the first counties in the state of New York to have a database. And this database cuts across not only family law, we're focusing on family law here, but across all areas of the law. Because animal cruelty or animal neglect or animal abandonment is an act, a bad act. And as you know, bad acts are something you could use in impeachment and cross-examination. And I would tell you, as a practice pointer, I'm sure you're all familiar with, a prior bad act of animal cruelty, of hitting a dog, could be more powerful than committing a fraud. So in the necessary adjunct to the cross-reporting is this development of databases. And again, you can see it's developing. We don't yet have a database. There is no such thing as a national database, and there's no such thing as a statewide database yet. And again, this is what's so incredible and profound about what this MCLE is bringing to you, is its incredible transformational paradigm in development of the law.
Thank you, Mike. And excellent ethics point as well, thinking about bad acts. Something for attorneys out there to look into is your client a mandated reporter of child abuse or neglect or animal abuse or neglect under state cross-reporting law? And as a reminder, it's the responsibility of an attorney to flag suspected animal cruelty in a family violence context. In many states, animal cruelty itself may constitute neglect or domestic violence. This is something Christine will touch on more later, and attorneys should consider reporting suspected animal cruelty to authorities and utilizing that evidence in vigorously representing family violence clients. And now we'll turn to Mike, who's going to help us define and identify animal cruelty, abuse, and neglect under state laws.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Elizabeth. As Christine noted, and as we're seeing here, the focus is on the state level, not the federal level. There are definite disadvantages to this, as we will see, but again, the transformational paradigm is happening on the state level. But let's just touch upon the federal level. There is an Animal Welfare Act that was passed in 1966 called AWA. It's a federal law, but it's limited to just regulating treatment of animals and research and exhibition. There is an enforcement arm of that called the Animal and Plant Health Inspection Services, which is called APHIS. So there is federal law. But as we can see, and as this whole MCLE is showing you, the focus is on the states because that's where the action is. And as Christine stated to you, they're all 50 states and the District of Columbia and the U.S. territories, including Puerto Rico, have animal cruelty statutes. Christine mentioned the ASPCA, the American Society for Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. And the ASPCA partnered up with the Michigan State University College of Law to create a really great website, which is a compendium of all the animal cruelty statutes and other statutes of the 50 states and of the District of Columbia. And this website is www.animallawinfo. So I really, if you need to see it, that's a quick way for you to get right on it. You could do it today, right after the MCLE. It's an easy access website, and you literally click on it, and you go to your state, and it'll have all the state laws right there for you. Let's do an overview. That's the most important thing right now. We have an overview here. I was told to focus on this, so let's look at this and let's read it. Every state's animal cruelty law is addressed. I mean, every one of the 50 states, although every state has their own animal cruelty law, they generally all focus on animal neglect and abandonment, on animal abuse, and on animal fighting. Generally, the animal neglect and abandonment we're talking about is generally misdemeanor. Multiple incidents may constitute felonies, and we're going to look at specific examples of it. Then it's also omissions, which is a neglect or deprivation, lack of food, water, shelter, appropriate living conditions. They also focus on animal abuse, which is physical acts of cruelty or intentional omissions. And it also constitutes, it'll tell you which statutes are misdemeanors and what constitutes a misdemeanor and a felony, and mostly those are called aggravated cruelty, and based upon either multiple incidents or the malicious intentional nature of it, or the specific type of animal, for example, whether it's a companion animal. And when you think of a companion animal, don't think of a certified service dog or an animal that's been certified in such a way to be a therapy dog, but it could include any pet that you socialize with and accept in your life. Also, as a part of the animal cruelty laws is, of course, animal fighting. And those are, you've seen the case involving Michael Vick, which brought to light the drastic nature of animal fighting. Pretty much every state now has, as a lesser adjunct to their animal cruelty laws, a section on animal fighting. And not only does it focus on the perpetrators, the actual people engaged in the animal fighting, but also spectating of it. So let's address the context now. And all these statutes, by the way, use the words cruelty, neglect, abuse, aggravated cruelty, and animal fighting. Simplistically, they mean precisely or exactly what the word is: cruelty, neglect, abuse, aggravated cruelty, and animal fighting. But let's look at a couple of statutes and see a couple of differences. California, and we're on that now. You see what it says, overdrives. That's in the general cruelty language there. Let's see if that's the overdrives. That's not just a pet, but it's also animals that involve farm animals. We're focusing on pets, but also Midwest, down south, elsewhere, you're focusing not on just pets, but also farm animals. You'll see the word animal in these animal cruelty statutes. I want you to note that. And it also talks about deprivation of proper food, drink, or shelter. If we go to the New York animal cruelty statute, there we go, and it says again, deprives any animal of necessary sustenance. And let me just see, do you have the slide that talks about the overdriving, overworking, and pushing? There we go, overdriving, overloading, drives when overloaded, overworks, tortures. That language you don't normally have a context in today's world, especially in New York City or even upper New York. where they have the great animal shows. But those harks back to farm animals, which maybe not big here, but it's big in the Midwest. So then we also have the words, again, animals. So you'll see that in California, you see it in New York. And if we go to the New York general legislative slides, it'll say, instead of deprivation, it'll say neglect. The language is similar. If you go to the Virginia general cruelty statute, there we go. You'll see each provides for each of his animals adequate feed, adequate water. Well, that's the companion animal. Do you have the general statute there? There we go. Any person, again, you'll see that common language there: overrides, overdrives, overloads. So there is a basic language that's used throughout all the animal cruelty statutes. There is differences between the language, and that's focusing on such things as the deprivation and the negligence and whatnot. And you'll see the same thing in Illinois general cruelty statute. You'll see how it's worded compared to the animal cruelty statutes for Virginia, New York, and California. And I'm putting her to work. See, there you go. No person may own or may beat, cruelly treat, or torment. So we also have, jumping to the aggravated cruelty statutes, and what Christine mentioned as aggravated cruelty is a felony. Aggravated cruelty involves intentional and malicious killing, and either it's of if you go to California, aggravated cruelty, it could be to a living animal, so it's a broader statement there. New York, aggravated cruelty defines as a companion animal. And again, I want to note the definition of a companion animal is very, very broad. And if you go to the New York statute right there, you'll see on the bottom, it says note on the power slide there. Companion animals defined as very broadly, and I want to draw your attention to the case of People versus Garcia, which is a very broad, which is a case involving Mr. Garcia took a 10-gallon fish tank full of 3 goldfish and hurled it. And they considered that to be a conviction for aggravated cruelty, and the goldfish was considered to be a companion animal. So you see how broad that definition is. Then we have the animal fighting statutes, the California animal fighting power slide. You'll see the the split, which I was telling you about, that the actual engagement in the dog fighting and related activities, participating in it with an animal, selling tickets to it, being the person who's in the stands or not in the stands, at the door, controlling the ingress and egress, marketing it or distributing it. All those are actual engagement. That subjects you to felony conviction. Spectating, you can't get away by just saying you're a spectator. That's also a misdemeanor. And that split, again, is visible in the Virginia animal fighting PowerPoint slide. You'll see it there, engaging in, preparing for, aiding or abetting, or serving as a spectator is the misdemeanor level, and then the felony is the engaging in, preparing for, again, aiding or abetting the actual performance. And then we have the New York Animal PowerPoint slide as well. And you'll see how they define it. So you have all 50 states and the District of Columbia and the U.S. territories, including Puerto Rico, all have animal cruelty statutes on the books, all addressing the various facets, the neglect, the abandonment, the animal abuse, and the animal fighting. And you can go to that website I mentioned to really hone in on a particular language of your state that's involved. If you go to the ASPCA Michigan State School of Law website, again, the animallaw.info, that'll really tell you your Pacific States language. But what I want to drive home, and so we've looked at all particular examples of certain animal cruelty statutes, but the statutory language that we have, and by the way, this is a transformational paradigm where all the states, it was almost as though one state didn't want to be left out with the animal cruelty language statute and involving the animal fighting and prohibiting it, because every state wants to be seen as not a backward state, but as a civilized state. But as we see so often, that only tells half the story, maybe even less than half the story. because while the state doesn't want to be seen as civilized or backwards, what the key is not only having the language, not only having the statute on the books, it's enforcement. The key is enforcement. And in connection with enforcement of the language in your particular state statute is a great website developed by the Humane Society of the United States. And that is literally humanesociety.org. One word, Humane Society, no period, .org. And this website ranks all 50 states, including the District of Columbia, for enforcement purposes as well as other purposes. So it's not only enough to have the language on the books. So you have that language. What do you do with that language? How is that language enforced? And it ranks all the 50 states, and California is number one, and that's proud for California to be number one. In the top 10 is Oregon, Illinois, Massachusetts, New York, New Jersey, Maine, Colorado, and Virginia. That's all in the top 10. And then the rest of the states are in the middle. The worst, among the worst is Idaho, Missouri, South Dakota, Mississippi, and Utah. All these states have the animal cruelty statutes. All of them prohibit animal fighting. All of them address neglect and abandonment, but the key is enforcement of the statute. What I mentioned before, the paradigm, the transformational paradigm we're talking about with respect to the implementation of this predictive link, it's focusing all on the state level. But on the state level, it's not a uniform operation or a uniform aspect. It's a product of a combination of several things. Your local and state police, and sometimes even interaction with the federal police, the National Park Service Rangers. You have agencies, the animal control services. You also have not-for-profits, and we mentioned a couple of national ones already, the ASPCA and the Humane Society. So you have literally a combination of all these working together in order to enforce it. That's why sometimes enforcement is not as great as it should be, and that's why I think that's one of the disadvantages of just having it on the state level. Each state's enforcement is a unique and state-centric combination of this hodgepodge of local, city, local, state police, the various agencies, animal control agencies, and of the numerous not-for-profit entities. In this non-uniform, state-centric enforcement combination of these entities is reporting. And that's why it is plain and obvious that the problem, one of the key problems and the keys to successfully enforcing these animal cruelty statutes is reporting and being a reporter. It's extremely crucial, particularly in these circumstances. And what are these circumstances? Underfunded courts, overworked prosecutors, under-budgeted agencies, not-for-profits, which also have limited budgets and certainly not 24/7 accessibility. Police prosecutors are confronted with animal control statutes, and while these statutes have great language and they're on the books, they're qualified. There's many regulations and there's many exceptions to it that you have to become familiar with in your state. When you go to the website and see the animal cruelty statute, you will not only see an animal cruelty statute, you will see a lot of other statutes. That's what I'm talking about in terms of the exceptions and the regulations with respect to applying the animal cruelty statute. So in these circumstances, being a reporter, witnessing animal cruelty, animal fighting requires special efforts. It's not like calling up 911 and thinking you've done your duty and giving your name and walking away and waiting for somebody to call you up with respect to being a witness or circumstances. No, the burden upon a reporter is a bit greater. You need to be proactive, you need to document and evidence and follow up. The prosecutor is going to need you to do that. What happens when you call up, for example, to police? The police is going to transfer you maybe to the local animal control center. And what is the animal control center going to do? They may transfer you to the not-for-profit or back to the police, and you're going to be shuttled back and forth. It requires you to be proactive with respect to making sure the complaint is filed, getting a complaint number, and really sticking with it. When you report to the police, there's a great website that'll tremendously help you, because I know now I've been living in one place for 25 years, and I now really know that I'm in the first precinct in New York County, and I know where the first precinct is. And I actually know some people who work in the first precinct, and I say, hey, Joe, hey, Matilda, how you doing? And there's a great website that'll help you, and it's called literally usacops.com. And you go to this website, and every state is broken down by county and by precinct and gives you the up-to-date current phone numbers. So that's a good way to do it. Generally, I'm not minimizing it. I didn't mean to denigrate it, but if the crime is happening now, if what you're seeing is animal cruelty right now, nobody's asking you to actually jump in the fray and stop it. You're being a good Samaritan by witnessing it. Call 911. That's still the top priority is 911. That's the emergency contact nationwide. If you witnessed it and it's a past occurrence, call 311. That's a follow-up for it. But again, go to the USA Cops website, and that'll help you figure out which police precinct you're going to report to.
If I can just interrupt, Mike, I think for the 311, that might be just a New York City folks. Although, but I think Mike's totally correct. Regardless of where you are in the country, if you see an animal cruelty or animal violence in progress, call 911. That will connect you to the police, and in every state, animal cruelty is enforceable by the police, so they should be enforcing it. But as Mike noted, too often the police might either have some sort of an arrangement with a local SPCA or other animal control group that might then take it over. So it can be complicated, but certainly always call 911 first. And if you're not in New York State and there's a past instance of animal cruelty and you don't have this 311 number, we would suggest either calling the local police and then perhaps a second follow-up call to your local Humane Society or SPCA, just to ensure, as Mike said, that all bases have been covered. Exactly.
Let me just step back for a minute, because Christine had earlier went through those examples, which were horribly graphic, and it takes something to listen to that. And the link here, let me say the connection here. I don't want to confuse you with the link, the transformational link we're talking about with respect to implementing it in the states. The connection is each one of those examples, each one of those horrible examples, each one of them could have been avoided. Had any of them been reported, had any of them been witnessed, each one of those examples could have been avoided. That's the key and the crucial nature of reporting. So we talked about the police. Now we have the not-for-profits, and we mentioned the ASPCA, and that's the first humane organization established in North America. You heard a bit of the history from Christine. It was created by a special act of the New York legislature, so it's quasi-administrative. They also have an enforcement arm called the Humane Law Enforcement, or HLE. They handled over 17,000 calls, and if you go to their website, there's a whole great description of what they've done in terms of enforcing and in terms of investigating and in terms of the reports that they've received. Do not confuse the national organization, ASPCA, with every state, and each counties may have a local SPCA. Those are different, and those are local. You have to go to your states and learn which one you will. You cannot go to the ASPCA and look up those individual things, because those are independent of the ASPCA. Again, you got to know in your state which particular not-for-profits exist. Another national organization is the Humane Society of the U.S., which I mentioned, and they're the largest animal protection organization. Their website, as I told you, is humanesociety.org, and they also have a great reporting. They handle reports, and they also handle investigations and follow up on that. A third not-for-profit that's huge on a national level is the Animal Legal Defense Fund, which was founded in 1979 by attorneys. Their website is very simple, aldf.org, aldf.org. And they divide being a reporter into sections. Their website, they talk about reporting when you see animal cruelty in a pet store, or believe it or not, animal cruelty in your local animal shelter, animal cruelty in your neighborhood. For example, we had this one case in New York where a person looked out the back window and saw a person kicking a bulldog in their backyard, repeatedly kicking it. That's an example of witnessing something in your neighborhood. That person literally took out the phone and the cell phone and taped it, which is great evidence. They also have reporting for rodeos and about hoarding. They have animal experimentation, and they have a mobile app you can literally download onto your cell phone. So these are three great nationwide organizations, but there's a myriad, and literally hundreds, if not thousands, of local entities in your states. The common denominator of all these, of being a reporter, requires you to be proactive, follow up, diligent with documentary evidence. If we go to the PowerPoint for the enforcement of animal cruelty laws, which is, and I'm putting her to work again, you'll see that the mandatory reporters are police officers, permissive is peace officers, and then humane law enforcement, local SPCA, and I mentioned to you there the Humane Society, the ASPCA, and the Animal Legal Defense Fund. And each state has their local entities. As you can see, we have in New York the Agricultural Markets Law, Section 371, which requires mandatory reporting. Again, I refer now to the idea of the database that have not yet been created uniformly throughout each of the states or even on a national level. So this complexity is plain and obvious, and it has its disadvantages. Next, let's go to the examples of animal cruelty. And Randy made a good point. We give this lecture over, we've been giving this lecture over the past year, year and a half, around the areas that we go to. And one of the things Randy mentioned to me, which is important, which is that while it seems obvious, I tell you, poor body condition, severe fur matting or a filthy coat, congested eyes or ears, flea, tick infestation, underweight with visible bones, limping or an inability to stand or walk, or an animal in obvious physical distress in need of veterinary care. It seems plain and obvious, and maybe that's because we've been doing it for so long. It's not. You're going to have to make a special effort to realize, be able to understand and appreciate what may be an example of animal neglect and cruelty. Another one that seems obvious, but it's really not, is a lack of food or water. Is there a bowl of water there? Is it clean? Is there stuff floating in it? Is there gunk floating in it? Is there chemicals? Is the animal underweight with visible bones? The animals, one of the things that occurred, we have a walk in Prospect Park in Brooklyn. Literally go on a pack walk with a bunch of people. There's 10 or 15 of us with their dogs. And we noticed one person was having trouble with their dog, and the dog was acting out. And there was a collection there. And it was a simple collection, but the person couldn't figure it out. He punched his dog, and the dog was taking it out against others. It may not seem obvious, but it is. And there, when you have a dog that's exhibiting extreme behavior, it could be because it's starving, it's thirsty, it's being abused. So it's not only looking at the dog in terms of what that means in terms of the family law practitioner, in terms of is there abuse and domestic violence. It's also looking at the dog for the dog itself, or the pet, or the cat. A big one, I think, that was touched upon by Christine is the lack of sanitation. Is it clean? Is it presentable? Is there feces, or even the smell of feces in the animal living area? Is there more animals than can be properly cared for? And very important, I was told that there's in the South and the Midwest, dogs aren't allowed in the home. They keep them in the backyard. Although when I went to my friend's house in Charlotte, his dog was in the house just as much as anybody else was in the house. But that adequate shelter is important. Is a dog being locked up or chained to a fence for an inordinate period of time? There is laws being now passed throughout the country and throughout the states with respect to a dog should be tethered for no more than 3 hours. They consider that to be too much. Abandonment. An animal is left in a house or yard that appears empty. A dog howling or barking for several hours may also be a sign of an indicator or abuse. Certainly other obvious signs of physical abuse is open wounds, scars, missing fur, missing limbs or body parts, burn marks, aggression or fear. Is an animal improperly caged or restrained? The animal has little room to move, and or is it unable to stand or turn? As you can know, there's a lot of debate right now and laws being passed on a federal level with respect to chickens having enough room to maneuver. Are they cage free? Are they giving any kind of life whatsoever? And again, the animal being restrained by a chain or rope or other device for extended periods of time. Are the chains or ropes embedded into the animal's fur or into the skin? A very important one is with respect to finding indicators or evidence of dog fighting. You have training implements. They may not be at first obvious. I mean, a treadmill. Some people have treadmill. That's could be innocuous. But if you look at it in connection with something else, spring poles and restraining devices, a pole with a loop around it, in a combination in the gestalt, you see these in the totality of the circumstances. It could mean that there's evidence of animal fighting. The obvious signs of trauma, scars, open wounds, and even with respect to a tail between the legs, shyness by the dog, backing away from a human. Again, the fighting paraphernalia, the fighting ring, blood stains, dog fighting publications. All these is signs of animal cruelty and abuse.
Michael, I'd just like to just say, like, I don't want to like overly sound the alarm. I mean, we've indicated, you know, Mike has listed a number of indicators here that may not actually be signs of, you know, or link the household to child abuse or domestic violence. But one should really be aware of all of these indicators when you do your global assessment of the situation of the home environment. And we're not saying that these necessarily, if you see these, there is child abuse or domestic violence going on. However, they should lead, if you see these indicators, that should lead to some further inquiry and some follow-up. Just as if you were doing a home visit and you look in the cupboards and there's no food. It doesn't necessarily mean there's child abuse or child neglect going on. I mean, it could be that it's just in between shopping periods, or that, you know, for whatever reason there's not food in the home. But it's not something you just ignore either. And I think that a lot of those indicators are like that. Some are more serious, which would really heighten your attention, but other ones are just observations that you put in your head and keep in there as you make your full assessment of the situation.
Exactly. To add on to that, when we talk about doing your assessment, you talk to the parent, you talk to the relatives, you talk to the children. Don't also forget neighbors. See if they, if they witnessed anything of an abnormal or unusual nature. Again, the whole key behind all this, the enforcement aspect and reporting, is that each one of the examples Christine mentioned to you earlier could have been avoidable.
It's hard to imagine, given the graphic nature of those examples, that there hadn't been somebody in that home, or who had contact with that home, that wasn't put on some kind of notice that there was something more sinister happening there. And I think people are reluctant when they say, well, look, I don't really want to interfere in a home when, you know, I just hear dogs barking, or, you know, all the time, or I notice that there's some of these indicators that Mike has. And we're not suggesting that you do, but we're also not suggesting, and we're encouraging you to sort of keep your awareness open for situations that really deserve more attention. And don't just ignore it because you think it's just an animal or it's just a pet.
Well, on that note, just in the past, I've been practicing now for almost 3 decades. When I first came to New York, one of my first places, I was in a co-op with paper-thin walls. My neighbors, typically at least 5 or 6 times a week, had these out-and-out, drag-down, yelling fights. And I would, being a former bouncer in a nightclub, I would go knock on the door and tell them to hold it down, and even once in a while grab somebody. The transformational change that's been occurring is that In that day and age, 30 years ago, you didn't report it. You just went on. Now there's a heightened awareness, and it's almost not only an ethical or maybe even a legal requirement if you're a certain mandated reporter or a permissive reporter, but certainly a moral obligation. I look back on that and wonder, why didn't I report it? But those were those days, and this is today. And one of the things I really want to hammer home, which Randy has, and we all have here, is the transformational paradigm that's happening on the state level with respect to the implementation of this predictive link between animal violence, animal abuse, and general personal human violence.
Thank you, Mike. Let's quickly check in on ethics and reporting animal abuse and neglect. Attorneys out there, something to look into: what constitutes animal abuse or neglect in your state. Also a reminder that it's the responsibility of an attorney to flag suspected animal cruelty in a family violence context. In many states, animal cruelty itself may constitute child neglect or domestic violence. That's something we'll be speaking about further a little bit later. And attorneys should consider reporting suspected animal cruelty to authorities and utilizing that animal cruelty evidence in vigorously representing family violence clients. And now we're going to turn to Christine.
So now that we have a better understanding of what constitutes animal abuse and animal neglect under different state laws, and also, of course, a better understanding of this link between the animal cruelty and other forms of violence, we want to show you how to use this knowledge in your practice. So we're starting with situations where either you are interviewing your client, performing a home visit, or reviewing the notes or assessment that someone else has done in a home or an interview of folks in the family. And what we want to remind you, as I think we've been talking a lot today, is keeping these issues in the back of your head, and certainly when you're in a position to be discussing them, make sure you're asking these questions because, again, as we've heard, these are really avenues of providing additional insight into the functioning of the family, and you may be surprised at really the answers you're receiving, and perhaps it leads to nothing, and you can be satisfied that you clear that up and there's nothing to be concerned about. But it may very well be that you hear responses that really put up your sensors, and you really are obligated to find out more, to see what's really happening in this family household. So to start off with, if you again are somebody that's in the position of doing a home visitation, or if you're even just reviewing the notes someone else has done, look for certain things, and these would include maybe obvious things that Mike has talked about, but evidence of a dead or injured animal in or around the home. Obvious signs of trauma or injury to the animals in the home. Mike has gone through these, cuts, open wounds, bruises, burn marks, missing fur, things of that nature. Like Randy said, if that's something you see, you can't just, ignore that. You need to do follow-up. As we've also heard, other maybe not so obvious signs, but things to make note of. And again, if it's not made note of in the report, that might be something to do follow-up on. Whether if there is an animal in the home, if there's obvious signs of food and water, sanitary conditions and living space for the animal, and certainly more egregious instances where there have been either threats of violence or actual violence inflicted on an animal while somebody was visiting the home. And this can include yelling at an animal, threatening to hit, perhaps as a means of trying to discipline an animal or something else. And also, as Mike has said, evidence of how the animal itself is behaving. If an animal is excessively aggressive towards anyone in the home, or is showing real signs of fear towards someone in the home, that could also be a sign of abuse or neglect. So something to keep on your radar, and certainly make the necessary follow-up if it does appear. Next, moving on to a situation where you're able to interview either your client's family member, or as Mike has mentioned, neighbors or others in the community that might have further information. We've put together a list of kind of model questions that you might consider asking, and that again are really kind of geared towards discerning whether or not there's something going on with the animal in the home, and if so, how that might be relating to the quality of life and functioning of people in the home. So to start with, this first slide is model questions geared towards neglect. And of course, we would start out asking if there is a family pet in the home currently, if there ever was in the past. If there is or ever was an animal, you would ask questions about basic care and husbandry, who is taking care of the animal in the family, where does the animal live, if the animal has ever been sick or injured in the past, passed away, been lost or given away, and also back to the question of the animal's own behavior. Has the animal ever bit anybody, otherwise harmed somebody in the house? Moving on to the next slide, we have some more model questions that are geared to perhaps even more sinister activity in the home, and meaning acts of violence on a family pet. So again, asking and starting with the basic framework if there is or was a pet in the past, and the past tense can be even more important in this situation because it could lead to an answer of, well, you know, something bad happened to the pet because mommy or daddy or somebody else in the home did something to the pet. So definitely, even if there is not currently a pet, it's still important to ask these questions. So as I mentioned, you would ask, regardless of whether the pet is current or in the past, if the animal has ever been hurt, the animal has ever died, been taken away or given away. If the answer is yes to any of these, you really want to find out why. You know, of course, it could be an innocuous reason. The pet, you know, got sick, was taken to the vet and died, and that's unfortunate, but it could be something much worse, that the pet was intentionally harmed by somebody. The pet was perhaps intentionally, you know, thrown out of the house, and this would perhaps be punishment for, you know, something the pet did, but also, as we've been hearing, this could be some sort of control and manipulation by another member of the household who is telling a child, I'm going to give away your pet if you know, tell anybody about what I did to you. Things of that nature can be very, very sinister, so something to very, very much be taken seriously. Also make note of any threats of violence to the pet, even if maybe physical violence has not occurred. Just the threat itself can be very devastating, and this again goes hand in hand in kind of the situations I'm describing, where a family member is threatening harm on a pet in order to keep the silence of perhaps either a child in the house who's subject to abuse or a domestic partner. And many times that will buy the silence because you know, if the pet belongs to a little child in the home or to an abused partner, the last thing that person wants is something bad to happen to, you know, maybe their last source of comfort in the home. So they will be quiet and perhaps allow the abuse to continue in order to save the pet. We've included some other questions that may be particularly good for children. You can ask, you know, for example, if there is a pet in the home, if the pet does something wrong, if the pet soils the carpet or chews up somebody's shoe, what happens? You know, do you worry about something bad happening to them when the pet is being disciplined, or something of that nature? And again, it could reveal some pretty scary family dynamics. And lastly, we've included a question, have you ever heard about or seen somebody hurt an animal? And this could be describing situations where perhaps there's a family member in the home who is doing acts of family violence outside the home. If there's a family member who's involved in dogfighting activity, for example, and maybe the kid in the household does not yet attend these horrible dogfights, but is hearing about them through the parent that is attending them. These are definitely you know, things that you would want to know about. Exposing a kid to that type of violence would definitely get in the arena of certainly child neglect and possibly child abuse, as we're going to hear a little bit more later.
Yeah, on that note, again, this transformational paradigm. I'm a baby boomer, and when things happened to us in high school, when I was in my day, you owned up to it as a man. You walked on. Now you have therapy when there's something occurs in the school of a nature, obviously with respect to like the Columbine shootings, but also now in terms of somebody passing away or experiencing a death in a family. I look back now on it and I say, well, therapy would have done me wonders when I had experienced certain things or even witnessed certain things. I witnessed suicide off the jetties in Long Beach, Long Island. So this is a good part where we're saying, but what has the child witnessed? That child may need therapy to cope with it, to understand why, to understand what they saw and to try to make sense of it.
Definitely. And therapy and other kind of rehabilitative issues is something we're going to touch on in just a little bit. Actually, we're essentially going to go through both therapy and really other things that you should, as a practitioner, know about that you might recommend to your clients, whether your client is a victim of family violence or perhaps a perpetrator of family violence. As Mike mentioned, therapy is definitely one of them. We've already talked about orders of protection for family pets, but we're going to hear about in a moment how you might use evidence of animal abuse or neglect as a basis for child abuse or neglect petitions, and also for injunctions with respect to domestic violence in a home. We're also going to touch on information about sheltering programs for people and pets, as Mike mentioned, the counseling, and also the possibility of recovering damages, monetary damages for expenses associated with the abuse of a pet. So with that, I think we're going to start with Randy and Mike, who are going to give us an overview of how you might use this evidence of animal abuse or neglect in child welfare context and also domestic violence context.
Well, I see we're getting close to our time limit, so we're going to try to move this along, and we really appreciate you staying with us because although the information is dense, it's really important. On this section, I just basically wanted to take this step and say that years ago it was questionable whether or not domestic violence in and of itself would support a finding of child neglect or abuse. The clear case law today is that even a single incidence of domestic violence could support a finding of neglect or abuse. When a child witnesses animal cruelty, I mean, just look at the example. I mean, Mike brought up an example of a criminal case in which somebody was prosecuted for animal cruelty because they threw the fish tank and then stepped on the fish. If a child witnessed that, that would be a basis in and of itself, I believe, to have a petition filed. Now, of course, in New York State, we don't personally file neglect petitions, but you know, the state or city does. And what we could do, though, is first somebody could report that incident to the authorities. In the other context, if you're representing a family member who's trying to get custody of one of the children who are involved in that situation, obviously that kind of evidence is powerful. As Mike alluded to earlier, it's these bad acts, some types of bad acts have more significant impact on the finder of fact than others. And when you're talking about animal cruelty, it really is a powerful tool in your box if you're trying to gain custody, and the person that you're trying to get custody against has a history of animal cruelty.
Let me just mention on the flip side of that, which doesn't come up that often, but certainly one of my adversaries made note of it, is I generally walk my dog around the Supreme Court courthouse, and I also bring nuts and feed the squirrels. Does that make a difference? I had a person walk up to me and say, I was on your jury and I saw you walk your dog. That's a good act. The flip side of that is how bad an act could be when it's a bad act. And I don't think anything could trump being violent to an animal or to a cat or to an animal.
So we have a number of slides here we've listed for you. Given the time, I'm not going to go through them that extensively, but I think that the major point to take away is that children's exposure to animal cruelty is emotionally harmful to the child. And that in and of itself, emotional harm is a basis for child neglect. And also it could be used in custody situations in which you're trying to vie for custody of not only, you know, your child but the household pet. We don't have to wait. I mean, I think it's clear when you read these slides and the definitions of child abuse and neglect, you don't have to wait for actual harm. It's the potential, it's the risk of that really should be on everybody's radar. And I think it's just very important for people to realize that, you know, Mike has talked all along about this transformational sort of shift. You know, domestic violence today is such a visible and accepted, you know, sort of on everybody's radar, enforced strictly here in New York City and in New York State. It's not we are moving towards animal cruelty being treated in the same way. This is not to say that we're going to over-report suspected child abuse because there might be some animal cruelty. No, it's just that it's becoming more and more unacceptable, and people are recognizing it as unacceptable. And when they do, they move their legislators to enact laws that really will sort of demonstrate that. So, Mike, I don't know if you want to talk about damages at all here.
Are we ready for that, or should I touch upon domestic violence injunctions? This is a great topic, so I'm sure you'll be able to stay a couple of more minutes. With respect to domestic violence injunctions based on animal cruelty, again, I'll go back to that website I told you earlier, animallaw.info.com, the partnership between the ASPCA and the Michigan University School of Law. We have a slide here, and this one I'll actually use, the PowerPoint slide. And we put here a compendium, just a couple, not a compendium, a couple of examples of the Indiana Code, the Florida statutes, and the Pennsylvania. And the key takeaway here, and again, it's part of we've been talking here, the implementation of this predictive link, which is, if you're a gambling person, you could bet on this because there's nothing more predictive and absolutely certain than a predictive link we're talking about here. And certainly it's worthy of obtaining and getting injunctive relief. And again, go back as a practice pointer, get the actual statute, bring it with you so the judge understands it. If you look at the Indiana Code, the statutory framework is there. It just needs to be used. It has to be implemented. Injuring or killing an animal with the intent to threaten a family member may be considered an act of domestic violence. In that earlier case I talked to you about People versus Garcia, even if he hadn't crushed the goldfish under his heel in the presence of his children, even if he just had threatened to do so, that would have been enough for injunctive relief. In Florida statute, section 741, the court may consider abuse or killing of a pet as a factor for a domestic violence injunction. So you see these examples here. You have the PowerPoint slides. I believe they're in their materials they're receiving for this MCLE course. So that's the takeaway with respect to injunctions based upon domestic violence.
And just checking in on ethics, something for attorneys to look into is, does animal abuse or neglect constitute child neglect or domestic violence in your state? And may evidence of animal abuse or neglect be utilized as a relevant factor in custody determinations in your state? Something for you to look into. And just a quick reminder again that it's the responsibility of an attorney to flag suspected animal cruelty in a family violence context and to utilize that evidence of animal abuse or neglect to obtain orders of protection, restraining orders, to initiate child neglect petitions, or to bolster custody claims where it is in the best interest of your client. And now I'll turn to Christine.
Thanks, Elizabeth. We wanted to leave you with some other important resources that you really would be remiss not to suggest to your client, especially here on this slide, for those of you who are representing family violence victims who have pets. We've heard the statistics that many people simply will not leave a dangerous situation because they don't have a safe place to go with their pet and they're afraid of leaving their pet at home with the abuser. So you should know this and you should make your client aware of this. Depending on where you are, there's either a dedicated shelter where where your client and the pet can escape together, or separate sheltering where perhaps in the woman's shelter, the mom and the children will be able to go there and the cat or dog won't be able to come. But separately in that same town or county, there will be a dedicated animal shelter that will safely hold and keep that pet, perhaps allow visitation during the period that the family is away at the shelter, and hold that animal until the family can reunite outside of the shelter. This is really important because it, one, will allow people the confidence to leave the dangerous situation to begin with, but also, particular where there's this co-sheltering program allowed, it's really important for the victims who have turned so often to their pets for comfort, and to have them there, know that they're safe. That's just an added sense of comfort and confidence to them to get them through what's probably one of the most difficult times in their lives. So please do be aware of these, and we've included here a link to a searchable national database. Just plug in wherever you are in the country and you will see what is the nearest sheltering system for your client and your client's pet. We also just want to pop in again with Elizabeth, the our ethics expert here, to give you additional follow-up.
Just a reminder that understanding the link will allow you to better protect your client as well as pets from family violence.
Now, we talked a bit about counseling and therapy, but just to reiterate, whether you are representing a victim of family violence or the perpetrator, these are very important things that you should either, well, certainly that you should know about and that you should counsel your client about. Particularly for victims, and in particular for children who are victims, it's really important that therapy and counseling is sought. The studies have shown that children, of course, who are exposed to animal cruelty and other abuses are that much more, I think 3 times more likely to become cruel to animals and certainly to become violent with other people. So that alone is a #1 reason why you should really urge your client, if your client is a child or if you have a client who has young children, to really seek counseling. Again, as Elizabeth mentioned, this is another point of ethics, but you should really be aware of this availability of therapy for your client, and that it's in the best interest, so you should recommend it.
You can sort of get it done by asking the court in certain situations as a dispositional order to order mandatory counseling.
Exactly.
So, and in that case, you get people who are reluctant to go in or don't think they need to go in on this issue, and you can get them to at least start to explore the issue with a trained professional.
We spoke about a practice pointer earlier in one of our earlier lectures, that it also behooves the person perpetrating it to have the attorney themselves volunteer for psychological counseling in order to ameliorate or remedy your prior bad act, because courts consider the fact that you've acknowledged it, you recognized it, and you took action to overcome your issue.
Exactly. It may not be something they can even choose. In many states there is mandatory counseling if you are convicted of an animal crime. That's the case in California, in Illinois for felony cruelty, and then it's certainly within the judge's discretion in a vast number of states, New York, Virginia, Illinois. But of course, even if you're in a state where it's not mandated or the judge doesn't order it anyway, as Mike mentioned, if you're representing a perpetrator of violence, this is in the best interest of your client to seek counseling to one, ameliorate the situation at hand, but also looking forward into how that person is going to go out in the community and behave, and definitely important. And on a similar note, we've been talking about these more egregious violent crimes, but if we're in a situation where it's a matter of neglect, just as a court might in a typical dirty home case where there's not necessarily animals involved, there could be animal husbandry training or good housekeeping training that teaches people this is the adequate amount of food you have to provide your dog or cat every day, and this is how you need to adequately groom them in order to keep a clean and safe living environment, not just for the animal but for the others in the home.
This can easily be incorporated into the curriculum of a parenting skills course. Obviously, oftentimes the family court in situations where there are dirty home allegations will order the parents to participate in parenting skills. We would hope that the parenting skills curriculum would include proper care and husbandry of pets in the home.
Exactly. I'm going to check in with Elizabeth one more time to see about ethics in this situation.
Sure. Just a reminder to everyone to encourage your client to attend counseling, even where it isn't mandated. As Mike had mentioned earlier, this is something that can be weighed when a judge is looking at a prior bad act and what steps are taken to remediate that. So that's in the best interest of your client, not only to prevent future crimes against animals and people, but if you're representing somebody who has committed animal abuse, this can be used to either lighten their sentence or just taken into account by a judge.
Thanks, Elizabeth. So there was one last substantive point that we wanted to leave you, particularly for those of you who are representing clients who are victims of family violence and have pets. In a number of states, your client might actually be entitled to recover damages associated with the harm that's been inflicted on their pet. And you will see there are some states that have these specific statutes. Alabama, for example, which would allow a recovery of up to $1,000 in damages. Illinois, which actually allows up to $25,000 in damages recoverable. And these would be for any sort of damages associated with the abuse or death of an animal, and they might include veterinary expenses, the emotional distress, and punitive damages. And this is actually very unique because in many, these are the very specific statutes. As a general matter, if someone's animal is harmed, most states will not allow recovery of something like emotional distress. But we have, in these very specific situations, that type of availability for cover, which is very, very notable. So absolutely take note of that. And for those of you in jurisdictions where you don't have this specific law, you should definitely look into whether the just general restitution law in your state would allow or in fact mandate recovery for the victim. In many states this is the case. California, for example, mandates restitution for conviction in all crimes, and that would certainly include animal cruelty crimes. So something to be aware of on that end, and we'll do one last check-in with Elizabeth on ethics.
Just to wrap up, something for attorneys to look into is, does your state allow for damages and recovery for animal abuse and neglect? And a reminder that seeking enforcement of animal crimes occurring in family violence situations increases the protection for your client. And Randy?
Well, I know we've provided you with a lot of information to digest. The materials that accompany this presentation are designed to provide you with a foundation for further research in your state. In closing, I would like to thank Lawline for giving us an opportunity to present our research and findings. And most importantly, we would like to thank all of you for taking the time to participate in this CLE, and we hope that it will be helpful in your professional careers.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.